Hello again. I wanted to talk a little about the video that I put out the other day. I only focused on the Flavian hypothesis again, and I've been having some fun putting lots of those inputs that Joseph Atwell details in his book into a Bayesian model, basically running conservative and more modest or moderate inputs and stuff, and it consistently comes out with extraordinarily high numbers for probability of textual dependence. And I was doing a little more research and just remembering books I'd read in the past, like years ago, on stuff like the astrological themes in the Gospels such as Mark, and also the Old Testament themes which appear as well. And we got the apocryphal and Philo kind of influences, and obviously the work of Zechariah and so on, Psalms. This is all Old Testament typology. And what is it? The Homeric and Greek mimesis as well, the emulatio, emulation and mimicry that's going on with Homeric epics, which look very much like they play a role in Mark as well, and the Josephine parallel. So what we got, the Old Testament, Homeric epics, astrology and the zodiac, the composition of the form of that Mark takes, kind of walking through the zodiac itself, and then the 12 disciples, remember, not attested in the first century at all, not in contemporary or near contemporary documentation like at all. This is really rather strange. So we have here, and I just chucked this into Chat GPT again, and I don't know about this modeling. I'm not sure about it. I'm trying to get it to be as rigorous as possible and as clear with me as it possibly can be. And I'm trying to be as precise as possible, ensure that it gives me accurate numbers. It looks like it's basically doing things that scholars do with Bayesian analysis all the time, and I would assume it's pretty good. And I'm more than happy to be corrected on any of these things. But if we have a little look through, it's pushing out these essays of about 3 or 4 pages at the moment. ChatGPT is extremely concise in the way that it operates, but the joint conclusion here, the probability that all 6 influences, the ones I named, are purely coincidental, is infinitesimally low. Even under conservative assumptions, the likelihood that at least 4 of these domains were genuine sources for NT composition exceeds 99%, and we have 6 of them. So, with an adjusted contribution estimate, what it actually does is the unadjusted total is 158%, which obviously is saying that there is overlap within these contributing factors here. And what that probably means is that there are obviously these things are written over a couple of 100 years, with quite probably with influences that go back a lot further, and there's probably this meshing of different concepts, Jewish concepts, Hellenistic concepts, and so on, all being kind of thrown together, that have their own sources within their own cultures in their own times, and they are slowly being built upon the other and making themselves apparent in the Gospels. The final adjusted estimate is giving me 94 to 97% of the New Testament narrative likely derives from one or more of these domains. So this is a strong thesis, and I always knew this looking at Joseph Atwell's, but I've got another book at the moment that actually takes so many more examples of the coherence here between Josephus's wars and the New Testament, and in real slender, very really quite inordinate granular detail. And I think it's really worth me doing some more work on this. It's really easy just chucking, because I know the layout, I know the landscape pretty well. I was just looking at but looking back on the Flavian family themselves, and the fact that their names pop up quite frequently in the earliest sources for the church. Domitilla, where is this? Sorry, I had this open and that's fucking gone. Wait a minute, here it is. The association of St. Nereus and Achilles with Flavia Domitilla, the Flavian imperial family, and possible links to Berenice, Veronica, St. Veronica. So I did a survey here, and it looks as though, and this is, I think it's chucked me out a percentage of something like 67% likelihood that these people were the Christians that later Christians talk about, and that they were indeed the members of the Flavian family, that they are linked with. Jerome echoes Eusebius here, stating Flavia Domitilla of the imperial family was exiled to the island of Pontia by Domitian for confessing Christ. Now, Domitian is Titus's brother, and there was a big split. They had a hateful relationship, and it looks as though he went after his brother died. He went a bit nuclear on people he was friends with, and they would have essentially been called Jews at the time, like maybe a convert to Judaism in Titus, because he apparently liked the religion. Remember, he married, or he had a concubine in Berenice, who was Jewish, at about 10 years older than him. Really loved her apparently, and I'm sure her worldview rubbed off on him a little bit, and that's all really rather interesting. So if you can continue to find these kind of factors here that mesh really well and that parallel the essential hypothesis that the Flavians may well have been the nexus for what the gospel, certainly of Luke, would become. And if we can look back to Mark and say that this is essentially a veiled gospel, encoding the measurements of the heavens, the feast days of Christianity, which are amazingly well coordinated with astrological signs and months of the year, even the middle of the months, and so on. It just gets more and more complicated and ever more difficult to just say these things happened through happenstance and coincidence. Remember, Easter, we know very well, is astrologically calibrated. All Hallows Eve, of course, being the midpoint between summer and midwinter. Christmas, obviously, and this is a pagan rebirth story in itself. But then John the Baptist, the virgins, feast days, and so on. It just goes on, and they are all Christian, but they're all actually astrological and far more pagan. We get the reference here to Hercules as well in one of the stories in Mark, and Hercules has his own constellation. But if we can see Jesus now as a type for Hercules, it all really becomes far more clear. And at no point do we need to rely in any way on an historical Jesus to fill in any gaps whatsoever. Everything becomes entirely something we can pin down to something else. And I will remind you all that the Bayesian analyses here routinely seems to be putting the chances of this stuff happening by design at over 99%. This is no joke. So I'm going to be going through some of this stuff. We're going to look at the mimesis. I don't know, I really don't like that word very much. But yeah, the Homeric epics and their probable influences. We'll look at the astro-theological stuff. We'll go through this Flavian court stuff, and remember the catacombs of Domitilla were, we can assume, laid down by the Romans, but they become the first places you see Christian symbols, and they are Flavian symbols. This is fairly well established by James Valiant, and people have critiqued his work, but it holds up in that they are essentially the same symbols. You can say, well, it's coincidence, and that's fine, but then we can conduct the Bayesian modeling and really find out if these things are if it's just background noise, and these things happen reasonably anyway, just because, coincidence. Anyway, I'm going to leave that there for now, but I thought that was quite interesting. I don't want to rely on Chat GPT here, but it has been extremely easy just going to places out and about, on the train, on the bus, and just saying, write me an essay on this, conduct the Bayesian analysis, make sure it's weighted properly, and it's just an extremely succinct way of getting quite interesting information. Anyway, I'll see you later. Cheers. Bye bye.